Most people think getting rich from nothing is about luck or connections or being born with the right kind of brain. But psychology tells a very different story. There are 6 specific mental patterns that separate people who build wealth from zero, and most of them have nothing to do with money at all. Researchers who study self-made wealth don't just look at what these people do differently. They look at how they think differently, at the unconscious patterns running quietly underneath all their decisions. And here's the thing. These patterns aren't genetic. They're learned, which means they can be unlearned and rebuilt. Here are the 6 psychological traits of people who go from nothing to something real. 1. They have a deeply uncomfortable relationship with the baseline. People who build wealth from zero rarely feel at peace with good enough. Not because they're greedy, but because something inside them keeps whispering, "This isn't the full picture yet." Psychologists call this baseline dissatisfaction, a persistent low-level tension with the current state of things. Picture this. You're at a job that pays the bills. Everyone around you seems fine with it, but you go home and you can't switch the feeling off. That quiet restlessness that something's still missing. That discomfort isn't a flaw. For people who build from zero, it becomes fuel. It keeps them moving when comfort would have made them stop. The world tells you restlessness is a problem to fix. For some people, it's actually the engine. 2. They reframe failure as data, not identity. When most people fail, they feel it about themselves. They think, "I'm bad at this. I'm not the type. Maybe this isn't for me." People who build from zero feel it differently. They ask, "What did this teach me?" This is called a growth mindset, a term coined by psychologist Carol Dweck. It means you see your abilities as things that develop over time, not fixed traits you either have or don't. Imagine starting a small business that completely collapses after 6 months. One person walks away thinking, "I'm not cut out for this." Another person walks away with a list, what went wrong, what they'd change, what they now know. Same event. Completely different internal experience. People don't fail their way to wealth despite failing. They fail their way there because of how they process it. You're not your losses. You're what you do with them. 3. They have an unusual tolerance for uncertainty. Most people need to know how something ends before they'll begin it. That's completely human. Our brains are wired to seek safety and predictability. But people who build wealth from zero, they've somehow made peace with not knowing. Think about a moment when you had a real idea, something that genuinely excited you, but you talked yourself out of it because you couldn't see the whole path. You needed a guarantee that didn't exist. That hesitation isn't weakness. It's your nervous system doing exactly what it was built to do. But people who go from zero to wealth learn to act anyway, to take one step into the fog and trust that the next step becomes visible after that. They're not fearless. They're just more afraid of standing still than of moving into the unknown. 4. They protect their energy like a resource. This one surprises people. You'd think the stereotype is someone who hustles 20 hours a day, never sleeps, always grinding. But the deeper pattern is actually the opposite. People who build from zero become ruthless about what they give their attention to. In psychology, this connects to the concept of ego depletion, the idea that decision-making, willpower, and focus are finite resources that drain throughout the day. The more you spend on noise, the less you have for what matters. You've probably had days where you spent hours in low-level stress, responding to things, reacting to people, putting out small fires, and by the time you got to the work that actually mattered, you had nothing left. People who build from nothing learn to identify that drain early. They start saying no to things that aren't moving them forward, not because they're cold, but because they've learned how expensive distraction really is. Your attention isn't just time. It's the most valuable thing you own. 5. They have someone's voice in their head that believed in them first. This one is quieter, less talked about. But the research keeps pointing back to it. Almost universally, people who build from zero can name someone, a parent, a teacher, a mentor, sometimes even a stranger, who told them at some point you're capable of more than you think. Think about the person in your life who, when you doubted yourself, never agreed with the doubt, who held a version of you that was bigger than the version you were showing the world. For many people who grew up with very little, that voice was the only resource they had, and they carried it into every room they walked into. 6. They develop what psychologists call deferred gratification. You've probably heard of the marshmallow test, the famous study where children who could wait for a second marshmallow tended to have better outcomes later in life. But here's what most people miss about that study. It wasn't just about self-control. It was about trust. The children who waited weren't simply more disciplined. They believed that waiting would actually be rewarded. People who build wealth from zero develop something similar, not just the ability to delay pleasure, but a deep, almost irrational faith that the future version of their effort will pay off. You see this when someone works on something for 2 years with almost no visible result, no validation, no proof it's working. Most people stop. But some people have an internal conviction that's hard to explain rationally. They just know the compound effect is building underground, even when they can't see it yet. This isn't naive optimism. It's a trained psychological stance, one that gets reinforced every time a small bet on their future self actually comes through. The gap between where you start and where you end is often filled with invisible progress. 6 very different patterns. But look at what they all have in common. None of them are about money. Not a single one. They're about how someone relates to discomfort, to failure, to time, to uncertainty, to themselves. So here's what I want to leave you with. Which one of these 6 patterns do you already have, even if you've never had a name for it before? Drop it in the comments. You might be surprised how many people are sitting with the exact same answer. And if this kind of psychology, the kind that actually explains why people do what they do, resonates with you, subscribe to Everyday Psychology. We go deeper every week. There's a lot more we haven't covered yet.